what makes residential land and lot development such an attractive asset class in today's market, Adam? So can you share with us?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be able to give probably better insight because I just started not too long ago, about 24 months ago, understanding residential land development and lot development from the perspective of being a broker that has lots and lots of capital on one side and lots of developers and builders and clients that own or they control real estate on the other side. Mainly, I think what makes it so enticing, which is probably one of the things uh, that really get underneath developer skin is it seems easy and it seems like it's the returns are huge for the amount of work you put into it, but a lot of people don't realize how extremely difficult it is. So the opportunity to actually develop land and lots, comparatively speaking to actually controlling actual built real estate, you can actually do it with a relatively small amount of money. If you find a land project or a piece of land, you can get it under contract and essentially control it and the development of it for a relatively small amount of capital versus what that land actually costs. It's everywhere and there's all types of opportunities, but it really takes a smart developer and someone that understands the entitlement process.
This is the Real Estate Vibe Show, and I'm your host, Vinki Loomba. Today, our special guest is Adam Stern. Adam Michael Stern is a veteran real estate executive and CEO of Strata SFR, is a single-family residence, a leading brokerage specializing in single-family residence built for rent and residential lot investments. Known for structuring large off-market deals and connecting institutional and private investors, Adam brings deep expertise in scalable real estate strategies. He's also the host of the Real Estate Podcast, where he breaks down market trends and emerging investment opportunities. Welcome to the Real Estate Vibe Show, Adam.
Hey, Vinki, how are you today? Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm super excited to hear your story. And today I will be discussing about Dirt to Dollars, the Smart Investor's Guide to Land and Lot Deals. Residential land and lot investing is a foundational yet often underappreciated asset class in real estate. It involves acquiring raw and title land for future development or resale, offering investors the chance to get in early and capture outsized returns as areas grow. With the rise of built for rent and housing demand at all-time high, this strategy is gaining serious traction among savvy investors looking to control supply and drive long-term value. Let's dig into today's conversation to explore how this often overlooked financial tool can help unlock long-term wealth for you and your family. So let's start with the basics. What makes residential land and lot development such an attractive asset class in today's market, Adam? So can you share with us?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be able to give probably better insight because I just started not too long ago, about 24 months ago, understanding residential land development and lot development from the perspective of being a broker that has lots and lots of capital on one side and lots of developers and builders and clients that own or they control real estate on the other side. Mainly, I think what makes it so enticing, which is probably one of the things uh, that really get underneath developer skin is it seems easy and it seems like it's the returns are huge for the amount of work you put into it, but a lot of people don't realize how extremely difficult it is. So the opportunity to actually develop land and lots, comparatively speaking to actually controlling actual built real estate, you can actually do it with a relatively small amount of money. If you find a land project or a piece of land, you can get it under contract and essentially control it and the development of it for a relatively small amount of capital versus what that land actually costs. It's everywhere and there's all types of opportunities, but it really takes a smart developer and someone that understands the entitlement process from the reports you have to order, like geology tests to environmental phase one studies to actually building a site plan that fits what a community or what a municipality might want. There's a lot of know-how that goes into it. So finding the project is one thing, understanding the project's highest and best use is another, and then having a team that could actually execute on bringing that land through perhaps a rezoning, but certainly through the entire entitlement process takes a really deep understanding of a lot of different components that involve buying or contracting to designing to executing on permits to actually closing on the land where you might have to get some financing. So my small sliver of it has really been focused on finding the opportunities that land and lot developers have gotten their hands on, and they're looking for exits for those land and lots. I've learned a lot by working with those kind of people, but they come in all shapes and sizes. They come from novice developers that haven't done a lot and are just getting to know and understand the process, which are relatively tough people to work with because very often they'll get into a project and they don't really understand what needs to be done to bring the deal to fruition, all the way through professional land developers who've done this a lot and know how to bring a piece of land through zoning and entitlement all the way through horizontal building. So to answer your question it seems easy and it seems like it's very doable, but it's extremely tough. And you got to know a whole hell of a lot and have a lot of great team members to bring together all aspects of it in order to bring a project to fruition. So in a long-winded way, that's why I think a lot of people are keying into it because again, the size of the returns are tremendous, but the chance of blowing all your money and wasting it is also very, very large.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's quite a description of everything, So a lot of things that you said. So let's break it down, everything. First
Sure.
question I'm going to ask you, how did you get started? You just mentioned you just got into this recently. So wanted to hear your previous experience and what you brought in this arena now.
Yeah, we kind of got pushed into it by we were almost forced into it. So I built a company around the build for rent segment. So my history is in the single family rental industry, and my my game plan to create a specialized brokerage for build for rent kind of evolved from me understanding and meeting lots of different capital sources, from private equity firms to institutional investors to operators that raise their money from both those kind of capital sources. So understanding what they were looking for in terms of markets and demographics and areas and product type. We were selling built for rent projects mainly to investors as built homes, communities that were already built or under construction, where the buyers were just buying an asset that was either pre-stabilization, so they hadn't been rented yet, all the way through stabilized assets, ones that have been rented. So, what forced us into land and lots is as interest rates rose, the builders that were selling to build for rent firms couldn't get their price. And investors needed an ever wider spread between what they needed to buy it for and what the homes were actually worth. So a lot of the developers or a lot of the investors that were looking for build for rent started to think about moving up the food chain. So instead of building built homes or instead of buying built homes, they realized they had to buy lots and then build their own homes. And, even further up the chain, they realized they were better served by buying fully entitled land to build lots to build homes. So the further up the food chain that operators were looking to move in order to own rental housing at the end of the day, they kept coming to us and they kept saying, we'd rather see land and lot opportunities rather than built home opportunities. Can you go find us some? Simultaneously, we were asking the builders we were getting our inventory from, like, what else can we do for you? Because the inventory you're showing us, a lot of it doesn't pencil anymore, given the new interest rate environment. We can't sell it for the right price if you build it, or even if you stabilize it. So what can we do for you to help you? And a lot of the builders started saying, hey, we've got all these lot positions. We'd love to sell them as build for rent, but we realized we can't do that anymore. We can't do it as easily anymore. The for sale segment is a little bit scary because things aren't selling as quickly as they did on the MLS, which increases hold times and it decreases returns. So they started asking us, can you find a buyer for my finished lot deal? Or can you find a buyer for my fully entitled lot deal that's pre-development? And we said, we know all the right people. We're selling it to the same people that are buying build for rent. and we then expanded our buyer scope to include production home builders. So it all kind of started from this need of built for rent people, built for rent firms to own rental housing, which forced us from providing that inventory built to providing that inventory as development opportunities. And then it was just a matter of finding and sourcing better and better opportunities from a wider swath of developers and builders that needed that solution. I needed to not just build homes and sell built homes, but to build lots and sell either developed or undeveloped lots.
So earlier you mentioned something. You said is you need a very small amount of capital to get into land and lots, right? And then these operators who you're selling the BTR or build to rent community was, they were looking to grow or scale. They wanted to go further up in the food chain as well. So they saw that opportunity, right? Like more money there. So what is the differences right there? I want you to understand when you say you need small amount of capital.
Yeah, sure.
How small is that? Because I'm thinking in my mind, there could be huge delta. That's the
Yep.
reason, they wanted to go further up in the chain. So if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I say that it requires a small amount of capital to actually lock up a piece of land, that's really what I meant. So take a deal size of a $3 million piece of land that you can essentially tie up and then start to develop. You might be able to actually lock that piece of land up for as little as 1% in a deposit. Some landowners want more, 2, 3, even 10%. But generally, as a land buyer, you can lock up that land for a relatively small down payment, right? So $3 million piece of land, might be able to lock up for an extended period of time for, let's say, $30,000. The hard part and the part where the money comes in and the risk comes in is generally you don't want to close on that land until it's been taken through the entitlement process. So if you're a land developer and you're looking to add a lot of value to the land and increase the price during the time you have it under contract, what you're going to do is you're going to lock it up under a contract for some period of time, and you're going to start spending money right away on doing surveys like environmental surveys and geotech surveys, land surveys, to figure out if there's anything that precludes you from building, or at least designing to build the thing that you want to build there, whether it's townhomes or single family homes or whatever the product type is. So the money it takes to actually lock the land up is relatively small. The money it takes to actually bring it through the development process can be hundreds of thousands of dollars that you don't even realize that you don't get a return on until the very end of the process, where you close on the land and end up selling it to the next party, which might develop the land. And then you might develop the land, which costs a tremendous amount of money until your exit, which is selling the land to a builder, let's say. So it's not a cheap or inexpensive process. When I said you could do it for a relatively small amount of money, it's just the first part, locking up the land and lots, or locking up the land. You can do it for a relatively small amount of money. What people get into real trouble with is not understanding the cost of doing all those other things to bring it through the entitlement process, where at the end, if you calculate wrong, maybe you pick the wrong area, or you pick the wrong product type, or you don't see that there's some there's some roadblock in your way, like an environmental roadblock or a permitting roadblock. You can spend all that money and realize you essentially developed something that's unbuildable, and you got to start over from scratch again, which means the risk is super high, which is the reason why the returns are so outsized, because of that high level of risk that you're taking in the land development process.
Great, this is very informative. So let's move on to our second part of it, the entitlement, because he used that multiple times in the conversation,
Sure. Yeah.
And then when you're getting into the land or the lot development, entitlement is the biggest piece. I think that's the elephant, basically, because you said multiple times, there could be entitlement or the permitting roadblocks. So you need to have enough connections. I'm going to say out loud over here. You have to, first of all, understand the process, build your network, or have enough connections to make things happen for you a little bit sooner, because otherwise tax on the land you're paying anyways, regardless, without even all this. So if you can take us through that journey, the entitlement journey or the permitting journey, what exactly is needed and how somebody can set up that foundation for themselves so they can just, kind of move a little bit faster when they take off from ground zero.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And this is something I'm just getting to know, and I'm learning a lot by working with really experienced site developers and developers of land, and also their engineers and their all the team members that they put together in order to go through that entitlement process. So one thing I could say is, to anyone listening, if they're considering, investing in land or doing any kind of land development, is to understand, the general outline of the entitlement process. And that
Mhm.
requires you having people that understand how to fulfill those different parts of the entitlement process. And just as a broad scope, kind of the first step is all the surveys and all the studies that you need to do to make sure that your thought on what could be built there can actually be built there. And you're looking at a guy that's done over $100 million of lot transactions as a broker that isn't great at looking at things like environmental surveys. One of the first
Mhm.
things that you should order when you go through the entitlement process. In other words, it's a survey or report that tells you all the environmental impacts and all the environmental considerations that a site have to be taken into consideration when looking to develop a site. Things could be at a site that are protected under the EPA guidelines, and that report will tell you whether or not you have to navigate those things or whether it's all clear of those things. That's just it's a dollar figure you got to spend to get a report. You should really hire a consultant that understands how to read that report to do. So right off the bat, you're spending money on an environmental survey or something called a geotech report, which
Yeah,
pretty
that-
much does it surveys the actual land and the composition of the land to tell you what it's made up of. Is there rock there? Is the soil composition right for building? Again, just another report you got to spend money on and probably have someone else read to tell you how that's going to impact your actual development. Um, then you got to figure out what you want to build there and what kind of permitting the town or municipality would allow. So if you're all about building high density, small townhomes in an area where they want to see larger homes built or maybe even have higher acreages on their land, you might design a project and say, all right, my geotech look good, my environmental phase one look good. I'm going to start hiring a developer or an engineer to put together this site plan. But do you know that the town that you're building in actually wants that to be built? Because ultimately, you're going to have to get approval from the town on that site plan, which requires a whole nother set of skills. So there's that part of that. There's that part of it where you decide what you're going to develop and what you're going to design, but also understanding that that thing that you're designing wants to actually, the municipality actually wants it there. And if you don't do it in the correct order, you might end up spending a lot of time and energy and money designing something that the municipality says, there's no way you're building this here. Absolutely not. We don't want these kind of units in our town, or you need to build them to a certain spec that might throw off your numbers. So that's what really the entitlement process entails. It's the surveying and the understanding of what you have, and it's the design of what you want to build, and then it's the permitting or the submitting for permit your idea. And part of that is getting in lockstep with people at the town level or the municipality level to approve that thing. Because ultimately, at the end of the process, when you've done all this work and spent all this money and time, you should have a permit at the end of the day where you're able to actually break ground and start developing, right? But not until all that money and time is spent can you get to that point. But when you do get to that point, your land, without touching a piece of dirt, even looking at a shovel, your land is worth more than it was before you did that work. It might go from a piece of land that was worth, $1 million, and now it's worth $3 million, and all you did is paperwork essentially. It went from a raw piece of dirt to 80 buildable lots pre-development, and that's the value that you add through the entire entitlement process.
So, but that's a lot of legwork, and like you mentioned, it could cost a lot of time, a lot of money, and we all know that money, time is money. But what I'm alluding to here is just like you work with a lot of people, a lot of professionals, a lot of maybe savvy investors. How do professionals who are like really, really savvy at land development, how do they do it? What is the
Yeah.
difference between somebody coming in new, not knowing anything, starting ground zero, and just going to this city development office or this office, that office to get the permitting and not getting, everything in orderly fashion because you might get something before whatever you need. something
Yeah.
that you needed a step one that you missed out, all that kind of strategic direction that professionals take who are like really, really savvy about it and they just make things happen. How do they do it differently?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was talking to you before the podcast, Vinki, and you do syndications, right? That's how you part of the way that you do your investing. There's
Mhm.
different ways that investors can structure a deal. Like a lot of the investors that I work with, they're just strictly investors. They've got the capital or they raise the capital, and they put together their teams to actually fulfill the needs of any project. So, starting from like a small person that maybe is just spending their own money and isn't raising money from outside sources and they just want to get their hands around a land development project, I would say just start small. Buying something like one lot in a community or in a place and learning how to actually take that lot through the permitting process and how to build a plan for a house that's going to get approved. The savvy investors that do this at a large scale, they've got their capital lined up. They know how much money they'll need to actually lock up a piece of real estate in terms of a deposit. They've got a pretty good idea of what the pursuit costs, they call it pursuit cost in real estate for the entitlement segment. That's really all it is. Entitlements are all about spending money on pursuing the project that you eventually want to build. So, having your capital lined up is super important. And the larger the project is, and the more complicated it is, the more capital that you need lined up. And part of that is understanding what people you need to have on your team in order to bring a project to fruition. Generally, it's going to be an engineer or a site developer, someone that understands how to, order or what surveys to order, how to read them, how to navigate the pitfalls that they identify through those surveys, how to create a site plan, how to engineer it, and how to work with the municipality in order to get it approved. All of that is just time and money, right? And the people that do the work, very often they're different. They're just service providers. They're people that actually charge a fee for what they're doing. So the better you have your team identified, essentially the core people, starting with a site engineer, the better off you'll be when you go and identify a parcel. You might bring that deal directly to that person to have them give you an assessment of whether or not that site is developable for a certain purpose. So, if you line up your capital and you kind of understand where it's coming from, and then you identify the site and you have at least one person on your team that can help you kind of identify the pitfalls or even the opportunity with the site, then it is just a function of, taking it through this process where other people have to be brought into the process, like someone that's an expert in the particular municipality, or maybe a site developer, someone that actually does the construction of the lots. These are all kind of people on your team that you need in order to figure out whether or not to even put a project under contract from the very beginning. So the last thing you want to do in a market is, be the kind of person or be known as the kind of person that locks up deals that doesn't bring them to fruition. You get a really bad reputation really fast if you start doing that.
Mhm.
So if you have your ducks lined up and you know the people that are going to be on your team and how you're going to finance the whole thing, you could be in a better position to actually consummate contracts. And once once you get that kind of reputation, deals just flow to you. I know a lot of my clients, they do several deals and all of a sudden their phone's ringing off the hook with people that want to show them their land. So
Mm.
I think the right team is probably the most important part.
That's true. I like that because I know, right? Partners are the key to
Yeah.
this stuff, projects. But I wanted to mention one thing over here. Whatever we're talking until now is all the kind of due diligence steps,
Yeah.
that kind of prepare you to get into the land or lot deals. But can we just simplify the whole thing? So, what is exactly the complete due diligence that somebody should take into account when they're looking into land or lots, before they even decide, okay, I wanted to go start looking into getting this land and title? Are there any particular steps that they should look for? Or, like for example, if you're getting into a multifamily deal or we're getting into build to rent, community, we just wanted to see the market, the demand, supply, job growth, population growth, what businesses are moving there, just to kind of set the stage for ourselves. Okay, this is like a emerging market for us. And whatever investment deal that we're getting into, the deal is going to fly. And we should be able to take this deal from conception to completion in flying colors. So are there any steps if somebody's looking into get into land or lots, before getting the lot, what kind of due diligence steps they should perform in order to make sure that that deal is going to perform for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always, so, we're not, I don't develop land myself. I do invest in land myself, but it's not my core business. It's really brokering these deals. And, my bent is always looking at what your end result is and figuring out what your exit is, and then kind of work backward from there. So, the way I identify communities or even projects I want to work on in terms of like finding where they are, attracting the right people to engage those communities, get them through my process, I always look at what the end result is. And for me, I've got all these different kinds of buyers that want to do all kinds of different interesting things, from production home builders that want to build a for sale house to build for rent operators that want to build for rent housing. And a lot of them have different strategies that are nuanced in one way or the other. Some, home builders want to build luxury houses. Other ones want to build move up houses. Other ones want to build entry level houses. If you're a build for rent firm that's looking for a specific demographic of renter, you want to look in certain areas that have certain demographics and certain income ratios. So what I would suggest is, if you're an investor looking to get into land development or land investing, I identify what the end result you want is, what the product is you're going to be ultimately delivering. Is that product a fully entitled pre-development lot for a home builder? If the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, cool. How many home builders out there want to buy lots pre-development, and figure out who those builders are or developers are? What do those builders generally want to build? Are they entry-level homes, move-up homes, or luxury homes? And then, once you get a handle on what the end product is, then you can kind of step backward from there and say, all right, what areas do I need to look in? What kind of demographics? What kind of economy? What are the things that fit into the mold of what the finished product is? Now, my job's a lot easier because I got a lot of buyers looking for a lot of different things. So I don't have to necessarily look for one project that fits one specific molds. I get to look at any project that comes across my desk and ask that question. All right, you showed me a project. You said it's going to be X, Y, and Z. Give me a day or two to figure out what kind of buyers we have out there for it. And then I decide whether or not it's a project that I've got a big enough buyer base for in order to take that on. I'm spending time, but I'm not spending money, at least my own money, developing that project for sale to those builders. I'm just telling my client or potential client if there is a market of buyers on the other end for it, so I can help them access that. So kind of in a longer-winded way that you probably would have liked, I always say, start with the end in mind, figure out what that end product is. That'll dictate what the areas are and what the price point is, and what kind of seller or landowner you want to engage to actually, get that kind of project, under control. But if you know what the end looks like, all the rest becomes a lot easier.
Master, I like that. Reverse engineering. That is like a really good, philosophy right there. Just have your end goal in mind, and accordingly, you just plan out the whole thing. But let me ask you this, from the broker's point of view, how do you underwrite a land piece? Because that underwriting could be different, from our perspective too, as an investor.
Yep.
But there is no building, there's no nothing. There might not be any utilities, if the land could be entitled versus non-entitled, maybe no permitting at all. So how do you underwrite that? If you can give us some peek into that, we'll love that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, my core audience for sellers or people that have the inventory are developers. And it's a bit beyond me to even explain to you how you'd go about finding the parcels of land you would actually put under contract, and how you would go about figuring out what to develop there. That's what developers are really good at. And that's why I decided to make my business really about finding developers and helping those developers exit to whoever wants to buy the end product of what they're building, whether it's a pre-developed lot or a developed lot or even a built home. So I can't give you a good answer for like how to look at a raw piece of land and figure out what goes there, because I come into it after that's already been figured out. I generally come into it when the developer's already done all that work and is taking it through the entitlement process and is ready to start horizontal development, and it comes to me and says, "Hey, we're looking for an exit here. What's my best execution? Is it a pre-developed lot, a finished lot, or should I even go ahead and do all that work and then build a home? Like, what's my exit opportunity?" And that's really where we come into play. And generally, the way I look at that is, you tell me what you thought the land is, the highest and best use is. You tell me what you're going to build, and I'll go look for buyer demand on the other side, so that I can tell you what your opportunity is to sell to that end demand, what the price might be, and what that time lag might be. The hardest question a lot of my clients ask me is, when should I start thinking about marketing it for an exit? If they come in too early, no one's going to be interested in looking at it because it's too early. If it comes in too late, you might burn a lot of money in terms of, financing cost or lag time between the time you build it and the time that you sell it. So, yeah, as much as I'd like to give you a better tutorial on how to actually develop the land, it's not what I do.
No, it's perfectly
I
fine. That's perfectly fine. No issues there, and this was my next question that you already answered, the exit strategy, people are looking. And again, it depends upon the developer's vision, what their vision is. And accordingly, they decide on the exit strategy. And that's where you come in and help them with the exit strategy. So at this point, I wanted to ask you, are there any other creative ways to work the land or lots, or some overlooked strategies or something I did not know enough to ask you?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll just tell you my strategy. I don't know if it's creative or I don't know if it's the right one, but I came into this not knowing a whole hell of a lot about the land development process or how developers made their money, how builders made their money.
Mhm.
Anyone that's listening to this that really wants to kind of wade in and learn this business is in any market, there are people that are developers. Find out who they are, talk to them, find out, a lot of those people, they're great at developing and not great at the exit strategy part. That's where I came into play. I realized that I can add a lot of value by, giving people access to this big network of buyers of all types that I've built. And all the things that I've learned about land development came from talking to really smart developers and their engineers and the people that are on their team, so that I could better understand what makes a project good, bad, or ugly, right? So my strategy was always look at the buyers first, figure out what the hell they want to buy, figure out, what that demand side of it is, and then kind of work backwards and find what developers are developing land and lots of that kind. Eventually I'll get to a point where I'm so good at finding the opportunities that, I could step into the position of a developer. So I'll know all the team members I need to have on my team in order to actually not be a broker on it, but to actually be a land investor and developer myself. If I ever wanted to get there, it's a hop away from doing the whole brokerage thing, right? It's just a matter of knowing how to find the opportunity, what the team members need to do in order to facilitate it, where to find the capital, and who the buyers are. So if you just look at the entire kind of span of work that has to be done, from sourcing through understanding entitlement, having the team, having the financing, and having the exit, you just got to figure out where your talent lies, I guess, where you can kind of slot yourself in, and talk to people that are experienced. Try to add as much value as you can to anywhere in the long line of that process. Maybe finance opportunities, maybe lenders, maybe you have people that want to invest in land. You could offer the opportunity to help people finance these deals. Maybe you don't know any of those people, and people that could help someone develop it or entitle it or engineer it. My strategy was just that. I'm good at finding the buyers and where the capital is, where the demand side is. So I added that value to all the people further upstream, and I just learned a lot about the process in doing that.
Wow, you shared a lot of golden nuggets there, like how to find the right partners, right team. It seems like more like a team effort. Even if you go as an individual buyer, at some point you need the right key partners to take the project to the next level. So from your experience, what do you see the land investors make the biggest mistake while they are, procuring this land, and then how can they avoid that?
Yeah, I think, for my time doing this, the biggest mistakes are made when they misjudge, developers misjudge the kind of product that they need to develop these lots for. Understanding what is is the most in demand product type, and then fashioning your lots to that product type. I had deals where the lots were too skinny, too shallow. It needed too many retaining walls in order to build a home. And by the time you get ready to actually market that to a buyer, they're like, I don't have a product type for this pad size. I don't have the stomach to build that many retaining walls, or like the development cost is too high because we need to bring in a bunch of dirt because there's such uneven topography. So a lot of, I should say a lot, but some developers, they try to avoid the costs of getting things like environmental surveys, geotech surveys, dirt analysis, and they try to skip those steps and go right to actually designing a site, and they find out after all that work's done that they don't have a sellable product at the end of the day. And that if they spent more money and time doing it the right way, the more costly way, it would have led them to the end result being a more sellable product at the end of the day. And that's where I see the biggest risk and the biggest missteps being made in that process of deciding what to develop so you could eventually either build it or sell it at the end of the process.
So one last question. What do you see in your crystal ball, in the current administration, how this land development project's gonna pan out? The development cost is gonna go up. It seems like, because everything is going on with all this tariff things.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of things are happening, I just feel like we're gonna drop big time over GDP too, but this is all, I can see, but what do you see in your crystal ball? What's gonna happen?
I think, land investment is always going to be a stable investment. It's always going to pay off in the long term if you pick the right areas. If you pick the wrong areas, it might just take longer, a lifetime to see them come to fruition. But if you're smart about where you're finding land and developing land, what I think is going to end up happening is, the real estate market might tighten up, interest rates might remain high, buyer demand might remain relatively low, and the demand of people that are building houses, whether they're builders or build for rent buyers, that demand might wane, and it might take a year or 12 to 18 months for that lack of demand to actually filter through what the land is actually worth and what it's trading at. Because right now, land and lots, they've been going up in value. Entitled land, finished lots have been going up in value steadily because the demand has remained high. But once the demand kind of levels out or even goes down, it doesn't happen right away in the land side. It takes months to kind of go up the chain and affect the price of land. So it's a huge risk. Part of the reason why most large scale builders just don't hold land on their books is for that exact purpose, because they know real estate is cyclical. And eventually, the person or the entity that ends up holding land for a longer period of time might get really hurt by it, right? So I think, we're kind of at the high point in the cycle. We're just starting to kind of reach the crescendo, and tougher times might be ahead, which just means if you're a land developer, you got to be prepared if you get stuck at the end of the process, that you have the wherewithal to kind of keep hold of your land without it getting foreclosed down, without the bank taking it away, which means, doing things like where you get your equity from, where you get your debt from, have to be thought out really, really well. Because if you get caught at the end of the cycle where values go down and now you're in a place where you have to hold the land for an extended period of time, you don't want to be caught in a bad position. So I think we're kind of at the tail end of a cycle where we might see, this cycle of real estate values coming to a plateau, and, land values even coming down, or even, if not going down, plateauing for a little bit, and things getting harder to sell at the end of the process. And that might happen in the next, 1 or 2 years. I hope it doesn't, but, it very well might.
Yeah, but again, you mentioned something really key over here. These projects are long-term projects, it's not, you don't have to be short-sighted if you wanted to get something like that, especially in real estate, because I've heard this multiple times, people talk about that, you don't wait to buy the real estate, you buy the real estate and wait. If you wanted to make some bucks there. So at this point, I'm going to ask you, share one golden nugget with my audience. I know we are over time, and then you have a lot of information to share, and I loved everything, whatever you shared with us, so many golden nuggets, but share one more golden nugget with my audience. Anything.
I guess in my business, the thing that's helped me the most is to be intentional. be intentional about where you want to go and what you see in your future, because a lot of people just float through their business without an end goal in mind. And it's okay if you lose sight of an end goal for a little while, but eventually just plant your flag and drive toward a goal, or where you want to get to, even if the plan is to lift that flag up and place it further on down the truck, further on down the field when you get there. Having that intentional outlook in my business to help guide me in my day to day, week to week, month to month, has been extremely valuable. And I fashion my entire day in business around reaching those goals.
I love that. Be intentional. That's the key for today. I love that because that's what's going to drive you. This brings us to a rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You're going to answer it only in one word or one sentence. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first question is, what is one of the most important things you have learned in your life, and how did your life change after learning it?
Family is the most important thing. And the decisions you make should always revolve around the people you love and doing the best for them. Because if you keep that in mind, you'll always come out a winner.
I love that answer. That's the key, right? Most often people forget in the chaos called life, all these important things. And in the later part of the life, they realize, oh, I missed out on all that.
It's
And those
absolutely
are
the
the most
journey. It's not the
important.
destination. And the journey is all about taking care of the people that you love. Maybe they're
Exactly.
family and they're friends, but if you focus on doing for others and taking care of other people, generally that helps you take care of yourself better.
I love that because you have to enjoy the process.
You do.
Don't wait to get to the destination because there's none. Share one good book that you would like to recommend to my audience.
Book. What I'm reading right now is called Atomic Habits. It's a book that
That's
was
a good
recommended
one.
to me. Talks about the little things you could do every single day in terms of your habits that make a huge difference in the end.
That's true. I like that. I love that book, by the way. In one word, what does life mean to you?
Just one word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Pursuit. It's all about the pursuit. Yeah. My one
Okay.
word. My one word is pursuit. You spend
All
more
right.
time pursuing than actually end up reaching the
That's
goal.
good. What is your biggest passion?
My biggest passion is just figuring myself out. I'm 46 years old, and one of the great things about when you get older is you kind of realize who you are and what turns you on and what motivates you. And it's that self-discovery process that really, I love that. It's where I spend an inordinate amount of my time trying to figure out who I am, where I want to show up in the world, how I want to show up, and how that's going to affect other people. And it's that self-discovery that's really the most important part about any journey, I think.
I love that answer. Who am I? Oh my
Yeah.
God, that's the biggest question of all time.
Answer that, man.
Isn't that
You're
funny?
in good shape. Yeah, for sure.
Isn't that funny that we get the realization when we are like older?
Yeah.
It's like, how come I didn't know that when I was 20?
When you're younger, you think it all comes from the outside, and the older you get, the more you
Mhm.
realize that it's all internal. Your entire life is basically a constant internal struggle over the ideas you have, the person you want to be, the people you want to take care of and affect. And the more you realize that it all happens on the inside, the easier everything gets, because all you need to do is really monitor that and control it. And it makes a big difference in my life anyway, having that mindset.
That's good. So one last question. If you could turn back in time and talk to your younger self, what would you tell yourself and why?
Invest in the stock market consistently and don't ever stop. I yell at him. I wouldn't even tell him to buy Bitcoin or anything. I just said, take a portion of your income and just consistently invest it in something that you
In
believe in.
something. No, not 100% stock market. Stock market is not doing good. It's not a good advice right
Over the
now.
long term, it's always going to work. In the long term, you can't argue with me, though. I would have told my younger stuff to invest. It might have been the stock
Invest.
market, but it
Yeah.
certainly would have been in anything that appreciated in value. When you're younger, you tend to buy things like cars and nice things to make your life better. But if I started my investing journey a little bit earlier, I'd be in a lot better shape. But that's life. Hindsight's 20.
Yeah, that's true. Invest in assets, not get more liabilities, basically,
That's
and
right.
that's a very good advice that invest more. And if you're not investing, I would say you're doing a crime to yourself. But anyways, how can people reach out to you, Adam?
Yeah, you can reach me via my website, www.stratasfr.com. All over social media, LinkedIn or Facebook. You type in Strata SFR, it'll be pretty easy to find.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Me too, Vinki. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Real Estate Vibe Show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone looking to elevate their real estate investing game. Until next time, stay focused, stay inspired, and keep building your real estate life. Thanks again.